Hey guys, welcome to the Real SD podcast. I'm your host, Patrick O'Connor with Market Real Estate, and we meet with San Diego's most dynamic entrepreneurs, creatives, artists, and professionals to talk about our city, business, food, music, and what inspires us most. So join in and meet your neighbors. Good morning. How are you, Shane?
Hey, I'm doing well, Pat.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining us, man. So, Shane, we'll let you do an introduction in a second, but just kind of wanted to kind of introduce like a little bit of what the topic is today. Me and you were chatting, and you have this kind of neat proposal and project that you're working on that ties together a couple of the passions that I have, some stuff that's really deeply rooted in kind of Southern California culture, and has to do with kind of the intersection between architecture and skateboarding, I guess, and then I'll let you kind of flesh it out a lot more than I'm able to, of course. But it was interesting to me because there's a couple of things that I really like, and we'll dive into that in a second. But let's just hear a quick introduction to who you are.
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks for having me, Pat. My name is Shane Yee. I'm a fifth generation Californian. Grew up in San Diego. I've also lived in the central coast of California, Seattle, Washington, and Olympia, Washington, and New Orleans, Louisiana, before moving back to San Diego. And I'm an architectural designer, a student of architecture, and I do a little bit of real estate investing, and I do a little bit of property management as well. And I've been working on this project, kind of skatable architecture and skatable urbanism. Have got a couple grants and fellowships from it that have helped develop it. And I'm working on a book right now called 49 Western Skate Spots, The Architecture of Movement.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah. So we'll dive into all that stuff a little bit more. And then one of the things we always do is we pick a record of the day. And so you got Beach Boys, Endless Summer. So I think that's pretty awesome. It's really kind of on theme for the topics today. Any reason that one jumped out at you?
Yeah, because the story kind of starts with the Southern California culture in general and the formation of that, and kind of the climax of that whole culture happens kind of in the 50s and 60s in and around Long Beach, where the Beach Boys were from.
Yeah.
So I thought that that'd be a great record to kind of accompany the discussion.
Yeah. It's like the soundtrack to like that whole kind of Southern California scene back then. So yeah,
totally.
We saw these guys at Humphreys a couple years ago, and they had it wasn't with Brian Wilson because he kind of does like a separate thing now, but it was awesome. Like every song they play is just something and it's like it's great. So
yeah, I mean, I saw your records, and that one popped out for the theme, but also what they did for music too, like Brian Wilson, and he wanted to take the band, you probably know this, like into more experimental psychedelic pop direction, and they were kind of like, no, we're a surf rock band. So and that kind of shows some kind of Southern California conservatism that a lot of people had back then, actually. Before the whole 60s thing started to really tip.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so without any kind of further ado, why don't we'll jump into your Skateable urbanism project and kind of talk about how what maybe the ideas that started that and kind of where that's going right now with you.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of go over it, and feel free to interrupt or ask questions or comment throughout the thing, because I could get going and I can talk about this all day.
We got time.
So basically, this, and I'll preface it with this is just one person's version of history. It doesn't represent. It's not comprehensive of everything that was going on in the time, like geopolitically and stuff like that. But this is kind of the thread of the culture. I call it the red thread. So basically, the story goes, people from Europe, generally Western Europe, were looking for freedom, and they started to go west. And they have this idea of the Arcadian dream. Arcadia was this kind of place that was like a utopia in Greece, back in the classical period. and they kind of made it to the New World, and they started to settle there, and they're looking for freedom and opportunity. And some people ended up staying in the East, and people kept going west for more opportunity and more freedom. Usually the more west you went, the more free and kind of you're on your own in nature, and this idea of living one with nature. It's a pastoral lifestyle, the Arcadian dream. And it goes all the way to the West Coast. And I'm jumping to the West Coast from the East Coast.
Yeah.
Going east to west. That doesn't really account for the Spanish thing that was going on.
Yeah.
In Mexico and California.
Yeah.
But so people make it out west, and as people are exploring the West, we have they're kind of these adventurers and pioneers. You have guys like Captain Cook, etc. And what he finds there is surfing. And everyone who saw surfing for the first time was blown away, because these people had mastered their environment, and they were conquering nature in ways that people had not seen before. So far in that they're almost one with nature, kind of like seeing some kind of like monkey playing for an enjoyment or something. It's so human that it's not human, so it kind of checks you. It's enjoyment, and you're using the forces of nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Captain Cook ends up trying to get a boat back that some Hawaiian Islanders stole, and he tries to kidnap one of the chiefs, and he ends up getting killed in the Hawaiian Islands. This is Captain Cook from England. And his ship's lieutenant continues his journal and documents skateboarding for the first time in the late 1700s. And he also makes some sketches of it.
Skateboarding or surfing?
I mean surfing, sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, Sterling. So surfing.
No worries.
And then as the Christian missionaries pour into Hawaii, because the ancient Hawaiians had practiced surfing for many years, and many other people in Polynesia. So when is the first surfing? I guess you could say as if there's like a log floating in the water, somebody could have ridden it in.
Like a happy accident. Someone found something that was buoyant and kind of used the momentum of the wave or whatever.
Exactly. Or maybe they had their fishing canoes and then used to ride those in. People thought so. But so like maybe an end of the day to a great fishing day. Yeah. Kind of little celebration. Mm-hmm. So as the Christian missionaries kind of colonize Hawaii, and they're trying to westernize it, they basically put the kibosh on surfing and said, no more, you guys can't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. There were still people surfing throughout the whole prohibition of surfing. And then we're going to fast forward from the late 1700s all the way to 1900, 1907. Mm-hmm. So people started wanting to develop Hawaii as kind of like a state, and to Westerners. It became more accessible to get over there, and it had been more developed. Mm-hmm. And there were people surfing there, and this guy, George Freeth, who was half Hawaiian, half Caucasian, was surfing on the beach in Waikiki. And this other guy, Henry Huntington, who was part of the Central Pacific Railroad and later Southern Pacific Railroad. He's from California. He's originally from the East Coast, but he's in California. And he sees George Freeth surfing, and he's just blown away. The reason Huntington is there is because the travel writer Jack London was riding a boat that he had around the Pacific, and he wrote a story called "Surfing: A Royal Sport" in 1907, and that was the first time the West had been introduced to surfing. So people wanted to go find out what this was all about, what Hawaii's all about that he's writing about. They find George Freeth, and Huntington sees this and is like, wow, this is interesting, because people didn't really used to swim or even use the water like that. Never really get in the water. Yeah. Backtracking here, so Huntington basically finished, his family and a lot of other railroad magnates. They're like the kings of the West in a lot of ways, because they have so much money, because they're finishing the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, and then, you know, people started to make it out to LA, and LA, you know, is in the bottom of a valley. Traditionally, people during the kind of like wrapping up the Victorian age wanted to live where the land was fertile, in the bottoms of valleys, or like where the farmland was good. No one wanted to live at the beach. But Huntington had a bunch of investments at the beach. His namesake, Huntington Beach, which later became Surf City, USA.
Yeah.
In a lot of Orange County. This guy, Abbott Kinney, was developing Venice Beach, and he had kind of this idea that it'd be like a Venice, Italy, and he made all these canals and stuff. But Huntington is really the guy who had the opportunity to bring people out there, because he started his Pacific Electric Railway, and he was competing with other people in his family over LA, and his strategy was to use the railway to bring people to places they hadn't been before. So one of them was the beach, and the beach is like all oil fields at this time. It's not the idea we think. Yeah, because when they're exploring the Pacific on the coast, people noted like, whoa, there was like a kind of a slimy surface of the water, and they said, wow, this is really good for oil. So it was mostly used for oil drilling.
Yeah,
until
and so
later.
That's what you still kind of see off the coast of like Long Beach and stuff right now, with a lot of the rigs that are like kind of like offshore right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Long Beach even has some of the wells still. I mean, the infrastructure of it's still up. And driving through there, when I was driving through there last, it was still, these things were up, but they moved them offshore eventually. And then that's even getting rid of now. Now they moved out of the country. Yeah. Out of country drilling. So Huntington brings people to the beach with his his electric rail car, and LA had like the best public transportation system at that time. I'd say this is like 1910s. And this is kind of before the automobile is largely accessible to a lot of people. A lot of people are still riding trains, and it's like, you know, things like this. But people don't really want to live at the beach because it's all just oiled out and weird. So he brings George Freeth, the surfer, to the beach in Los Angeles, and he starts doing demonstrations and surfing demonstrations in like 1907, 1908. George Freeth becomes the first volunteer lifeguard. There was no lifeguards. People couldn't swim, and he would basically there's papers about it if you look in like the old LA Times, things like this, or not LA Times, LA newspapers, and they're writing about him like, this guy saved 7 people single-handedly, and he's like, so
he's like the local hero.
He's the local hero. He's the first guy, like the first California surfer guy. Yeah. And he ends up, being the first paid Redondo Beach lifeguard. Yeah. And so then people are getting in the water, and more people with Huntington's railway are able to commute. It makes the suburbs at the beach possible, and it makes the suburbs in Orange County possible with these rail lines that he's strung up. Then, you know, the coast kind of develops more into, what we now know is, like, if you fast forward like through like from 1910 to like the 40s, the population of California like increases 5 times. Yeah. Like 2 million people to 10 million. So this is all laying the groundwork for what skating would become, but basically, in a nutshell, the California coastal elite kind of starts forming, and the beach isn't really accessible for living to a lot of people anymore. And there's a lot of drawbacks of surfing, with like the waves not being good. You need like this big old board, like you have to get in the water. And when surfers during their off time started taking up skateboarding, because they already mastered their environment in the water. But now if you look eastward from the coast, oh wow, there's this like concrete jungle that we can explore and try to navigate. And at first, they're just kind of skateboarding the hard surfaces and doing a little slalom and downhill. And then as the board and wheel technology get better, people are able to start riding up like schoolyard asphalt banks and drainage ditches. And then in 76 and 77, the polyurethane wheels made in 72. So that they used to have clay wheels where if you hit a rock, you're basically toasted. There's nothing you can do. Yeah. I'm sure you know about like even hitting a rock with modern wheels, you can kind of go down.
Yeah, the famous wheel bite.
Wheel bite, exactly.
Yeah.
And in 76, 77, there's the famous Southern California drought, and people start draining their swimming pools. And this is kind of the birth of vertical skateboarding, when, you know, guys like you've seen the movie Dogtown and Z-Boys, they start skating the pools. And then after the pool generation, you have people start building parks that replicate the pools. And these are kind of happening, and there's a big boom in skateboarding. But then the liability and the insurance costs were so high, all the parks had to close. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then this phenomena, like basically, either people started building backyard ramps, or the other option is to explore the streets more. And then what basically happened is the grinds of the pool, like grinding the pool coping in the pool, and learning the frontside air, like defying gravity, and then learning the ollie in the skate park. Those maneuvers were all taken to the streets. Mm-hmm. And then this is kind of the birth of street skating, which is in part Southern California phenomenon, but is also occurring and developing on the East Coast, because a lot of the plazas and public parks, this forgotten kind of slab benches and stuff, people were reimagining the landscape, and they wanted to become masters of that environment. Mm. And that's kind of, you know, and then throughout the 90s, they're developing these flip tricks and these grinds. People in the, you know, before that, people had already tried to get up on a handrail and bigger ledges and stuff. And that's kind of where we're at today. But the exploration of the concrete jungle and mastering the public and private, you know, in cities that had formed these concrete jungles, kind of leave us where we're at today, where skateboarding is illegal in a lot of downtowns. Yeah. And it was never really designed for. So that's kind of where my project starts. The problem statement is essentially cities are largely unskateable. Mm-hmm. And this is because of legality, you know, lack of design intention, things like there's no network system. Mm-hmm. So basically what I'm trying to do is educate the public, show them the roots of freedom culture with surfing all the way up, and how it kind of develops the West, and then reframing the conversation of skateboarding. And just like Huntington kind of used surfing to market this California dream, which has since spread across the globe, I think the same kind of thing could be done for skateboarding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, recently within San Diego, they've put a lot of time and effort into actually kind of redesigning the corridors between downtown and some of like Hillcrest with the bike lanes and things like that. So there's now these dedicated lanes, and then, you know, they also had to kind of make sure the pavement was in good shape. Of course, when you're even just driving around San Diego, some of the infrastructure of the roads is just really just lacking. Yeah. So it is something that, as far as like, you know, they're doing it for bikes, but I think there's some overlay where that could also be, you know, used and shared for skateboarding as well. So
exactly. And you know, you're exactly right. The bike lane, it hasn't even been explored to its full potential. A lot of other cities on the West Coast, like Seattle with its Burke-Gilman Trail and these kind of things, or like having the extended green lane, it's San Diego formed around the automobile. We're having a hard time making that transition to a fully urban integrated city that's walkable. You know, we're park poor in San Diego. Mm-hmm. For the number of residents we have. We don't have enough park and green space. So kind of the idea is to try to make this skatable urbanism where people can use it's a multi-purpose kind of thing. Like maybe it's a skate lane that attaches, so it's transportation, and then it attaches infrastructure like park space to each other. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing that I've kind of wanted to introduce is this idea of kind of like drainage. The early skate spots that people are discovering in the concrete jungle are ditches and pools, and most of these things hold water and direct water.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could have some kind of integrated space that directs water to certain, stormwater runoff or like complex drainage systems,
mm-hmm.
I think it would be a very happy marriage to marry transportation, park, and some kind of green infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And there's a few plazas that have done this, not many, where they have like the new Linda Vista Skate Park has kind of this like stormwater retention space that's built into it, and
mm-hmm.
Ed Benedict Skate Plaza in Portland, Oregon has like kind of this network. But you can use, the Romans have that those canals and drainage system, which is why they're seen as like the masters of construction technology.
Yeah, the whole viaduct system.
Exactly. And these things are like massive projects that mm-hmm. Even in Southern California, like the LA River or these kind of things, and they are skated, mm-hmm. but they're not meant for skating yet. Yeah. So I think that there could be some kind of network system like this. This is very big picture. Yeah. The small picture would be skatable architecture, so this is like the macro solution is the skatable urbanism. Mm-hmm. The micro solution is skatable architecture. And what that is basically injecting skatable features into the architecture itself, which basically gives a function to what were previous, like just kind of frivolous architectural moves with curvature of walls and these types of things. Mm-hmm. If you see some kind of crazy curve, Frank Gehry, Zaha Hadid building, what is the function other than, art or this kind of thing? So it's kind of, the project, there's a lot, it's really open-ended. Then I'm trying to work on this thing too, which is like getting skateboarding into the schools, mm-hmm. where you have a tennis court, or like a basketball court or a soccer field, then having a skate park in the school. Mm-hmm. And then maybe in high school having the skate park, and then you could compete against different schools. Yeah.
Skate teams, just like they have organized sports, yeah.
Exactly, and then it gives designers a chance to design these multi-million-dollar facilities mm-hmm. for colleges and universities, and it becomes this whole other thing as people kind of are maybe, I don't know if this is really happening, but people have voiced to me, team sports are down. Because I think, skateboarding, to enter that, there's no coach necessarily. Mm-hmm. There could be a lot of kids that need a coach. That would really help out a lot of kids. Yeah. But I mean, in general, you don't need a coach, and all you need is the board and a hard surface.
Yeah. It's a low barrier to entry, and to get a skateboard put together is a pretty simple process. And most kids get one for like their birthday or for Christmas one year, and then it either kind of strikes this sort of like artistic interest in some kids, or it sits in the garage. But it's one of those things that like almost every kid has at one point in their life. So then it's just like how they decide to pursue it, and like whether it kind of sparks that like interior artistic kind of passion with them.
Yeah, and like surfing, some people surf every day, some people surf once a year. Yeah. But if you could do it, and then mm-hmm. if the kid, is like, I don't want to go to school, but then if there's a skate park at the school, hey, maybe I want to go to school now, mm-hmm. or something mm-hmm. like this. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the truth of it is, the kids who are getting really good at it are millionaires by the time they're teenagers. So it's of course it's an Olympic sport now, so it's broken that barrier to become an Olympic sport when we get to have the Olympics again, so that's just one facet of it becoming a mainstream thing. But it's also showing that it used to be, if you looked at a bunch of skateboarders and there was like the general kind of societal notion that they're troublemakers, or they're just like up to no good or something like that. But the truth is, it's keeping kids out of school, it's giving, or out of trouble, I mean. It gives them a true career path. I mean, there's multiple millionaire skateboarders. Not only that, they create the next companies that become part of the industry as well. So there's just a huge lane of opportunity within it when those kids are kind of like guided correctly through it as a sport and as a culture. So. Yeah, I think that like that's why it's really exciting right now, because it's like making this transformation. When you're exploring the city and just kind of for play, like skateboarding, like creative play, people don't like to see that. They say they want you to go to work and stuff. They don't want you to be skating through the city and stuff like this. So it is shocking to see. but it's also beautiful to see. And yeah, like if all this creative energy can be turned into something positive, with a little bit of guidance, it's gonna really help everybody. And
Yeah.
yeah, like you're saying, it's skateboarding is an art and video and advertising subject and marketing subject. It's a competitive sport. There's lots of there. It's like it's a fashion. There's lots of industries. It's $1 billion industry, and no one knew why for so long. But I think people are starting to figure out why this is moving so much product and stuff like this.
Yeah, yeah, and that's just like a byproduct of like the commerce part of it, but it's also it really is its own culture and what a certain amount of people just you identify yourself as a skateboarder if you've ever been part of like growing up around that, and it sticks with you for life. And it's like then there's also just the industry part of it as well. So, of course that goes with pretty much any sports. You love baseball, you play it your whole life, but then there's also like the merchandising, all that kind of stuff as well. So.
Yeah, totally.
But real quick, to touch back on one of your points that you were talking about with sort of your architecture project, I think there's a couple cool case studies that are interesting to look at. For example, in Europe, in Barcelona, there's this really famous art museum, MACBA, and it's this beautiful plaza, and it was built as part of sort of the Contemporary Museum of Art to have this sort of plaza attached to it outside, but it's become this world famous sort of skate plaza, and there's sort of been this, I guess it's unofficial, but there's sort of this agreement that, the skateboarders can use it as long as there's, respect and maintenance of the property. And it's become this thing where people, just regular tourists, will go there for the art, to go see the art display and installations. But then they're outside hanging out watching the skateboarders all day, because it's literally some of the best in the world go there to skate the plaza. So it's kind of a neat intersection of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's just kind of, MACBA is kind of like, it's an art museum, and it has this kind of Miesian modern design where it's like this marble ledge, hard lines, and that really lends itself to skating in ways that people would have never expected. So yeah, that can be replicated here. And then the question becomes, okay, well, how do you make it safe, and how do you separate the passerby or the viewer from the skater? And I think that's one of the main problems in my project. It's not really that big of a problem. You provide other seating that's designated for not skating, but that's going to be, proposing this to the city. That's going to be one of the challenges, trying to separate these, or trying to create the flow and keep it safe for everyone. But I love how the Europeans are more lax on things like that. There's a lot of like plazas that are like legally skated and like turned into kind of skate parks. There's this one in France that the street that they made into like a little tech ledge plaza, and everybody loves it. And the pedestrians walk by, people skate it all the time.
Yep.
The kind of forgotten public spaces where it's just kind of like an afterthought of the architecture, and then there's just like some benches and stuff. Or like ledges. Skaters really took changed the conversation and took advantage of those spaces in ways that nobody saw coming. The architects did not see that coming, especially like Love Park, these kind of things. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at in the conversation, like how to synthesize these ideas of skatable space and just public space in general.
Yeah.
And then maybe throwing in some kind of green element.
Yeah. I mean, it's awesome. It's that's all the stuff that the city seems to be trying to plan more for, a bunch of these green spaces and parks and things like that. And like we said, they're starting to improve more of like the mobility and infrastructure, so that you don't have to be tied to your car, and you don't have to be, the bus lines and things like that get you so far to these certain hubs, but then there's sort of that last mile problem that people are trying to figure out. And of course the scooters are everywhere now, so skateboarding is one of those things where you keep your skateboard with you, or you keep your bike with you, and then that's what gets you to your sort of final destination, whether that's your house or campus or work or whatever it might be. So
that's a great point. The last mile, that's a good way to put it. I have heard of that, but I never thought that. Yeah, that's because when you get off the bus or at the transit station, that's not where you need to be.
Yeah.
You still have to go further.
Yeah.
So that's a really good point. The last mile, I like that. That's really cool.
Hey, you get to use it for free. No.
Okay, hey. But
I think I heard it from something to do with like Uber or like because they're trying to like literally become your new like mobility platform for everything, and that's kind of like one of their big like stall points is like how do we get people from like exactly where they are to exactly where they need to be, and it's like they might not have that solution, and there might be like that personal responsibility of how do you get yourself to where you want to go, and like that's kind of the thing. So
yeah, like so I like work in East Village, and I park my car in what is that, Sherman Heights.
Sherman Heights, yeah, just across the freeway.
Exactly, because the parking's free there. So then I just do my little last mile walk in.
Yeah, exactly.
If I'm skating that, it's like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
If I'm walking, it's like 20 minutes.
Yeah. And for example, if you have a bike, it's a little bit bigger, clunkier thing to carry around. And of course, like San Diego, unfortunately, is famous for bike thieves. So it's like your skateboard, whether you have maybe a little cruiser or a longboard or whatever you want to carry, but it's a little bit more like a carryable form of transportation that you could throw into your desk or something like that. Whereas a bike is a little bit too big to kind of like bring indoors and in the elevator and stuff. So.
Well, Pat, what about the foldable bikes?
Yeah, my wife actually has one, a foldable e-bike, and it's like, it seems like it's a great idea, but they're not that foldable.
I think they need a little bit of ways to go on that one. It's hard to shrink a bike wheel down. It's hard to not be just carrying 2 bike wheels and like a bar of steel.
Yeah. There's just like functional limitation of it, so.
Well,
it's interesting. I think that brings us to one of the other things that you and I were talking about is, so like with parking and all this kind of stuff in San Diego, of course, there's also like a density problem or a density issue of like, the housing units and housing supply. And in the past, San Diego always said you can only develop as much as you can provide parking for. So it literally required you can't build X amount of units without giving people a place to park their car. So it really still tied, the development and the growth of our city to having an automobile. And recently they've kind of decoupled that. So you can provide housing units, you can provide, homes for people without having to specifically provide parking for them. But then one of the things that's also, of course, a really hot topic that you have a little experience with and we're talking about is ADUs. So it's accessory dwelling units, or like granny flats is what like the common term is. But if you want to kind of share a little bit about like some of that you've been working with and seeing.
Yeah, so basically to kind of frame what's going on here, like we talked about earlier, the California cities are based around the automobile. You have a European plan would be there's like a Central Park, Central Plaza, and all the housing's around that. Everything's all dense, because this was built before the automobile. So you have your little local market, you go to all the stuff you're walking. And the East Coast, to an extent, is a lot like that. It's more dense, etc. So when everything's all spread out like it is in San Diego, it can be really efficient for having a car. And the zoning is all spread out. It has its perks, but what we're realizing here is that, a lot of people want more human interaction and they want to be more outdoors. And with this urban sprawl, you're kind of unnecessarily taking up more land that could be given back to nature with this kind of thing. So the idea behind new urbanism is to kind of create these more dense but exciting kind of neighborhoods. And the problem with that is that a lot of the zoning for these places is not really zoned for multiple units, things like this. It's mostly single family residential or things like this. So with the ADU, the idea is, and with the housing crisis, which is we were talking about last time, which is basically supply and demand. There is not enough supply and a lot of demand, jacking up prices. So the thought behind the kind of loosening of the regulations on that in 2016, I think it passed in 2017, and it's basically you can have somebody living in an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, behind the main unit or in front of, just somewhere else on the property that you could rent out to another tenant. And it used to be that it was like owner occupied.
Yeah.
Like if you had a little slice of land with your house on it, and then in the back, if you had another place, like you had to occupy the front house. Now you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other benefits to the ADU, like that they've been trying to push this thing because to kind of solve the housing crisis and to give the landowner a little more freedom and to give renters more places to affordably live.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple things in there that you were talking about. So first, they're trying to streamline the process, and they've removed a bunch of fees. I think it's through maybe 2025 when they're going to sort of like kind of assess everything like that. So sort of like the development fees and the red tape to designing and implementing this. So try to remove some of the barriers for like the average person to be able to try and build and utilize the property that they already own.
Yeah, I think some of the utility fees are waived, and then the environmental impact fee is waived.
Exactly. Yeah.
And parking is in some cases waived if it's within certain distances from transit.
Yeah. If you're within a transit corridor, you don't have to provide parking for the ADU any longer. So.
Yeah, and what's another one? The HOA is no longer involved in that permitting process.
Oh, really?
So
okay.
That's a really good one. Yeah, because they could just put the kibosh on it before.
Yeah. I mean, if you live in an HOA community, you're kind of subject to whatever rules and CC&Rs they're imposing on you. So.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Yeah, and I think what happened a lot is, a lot of people have these homes with like a garage in the back or whatever, and as a result of not being able to sort of legally do these things, people were doing it anyway because again, there's such a demand for housing, and if someone has a usable space, they're going to like kind of just whatever put together like a bathroom and a kitchen, but then the problem is you have sort of like a diminished living experience and what's kind of truly like uninhabitable living. So you had these kind of like substandard living quarters because people were trying to fly under the radar because they made such a barrier to entry to create it. And I think one of the end results of all this happening is people will create better living spaces because it's easier to do that, and they'll actually create nicer living units, so there's more supply that's a better quality of living for a lot more people. So
yeah, I mean, when I'm looking for real estate and things like this, sometimes they have already converted a garage, and I'll ask the realtor, what's going on with this? Is this permitted? And then they kind of have to sidestep around it. Yeah. Oh no, but it does technically count. I'm like, no, it doesn't count. They're like, they won't say that, of course. But
they say buyer to do their own due diligence.
Yeah, and it's, let me check on that for you. And it's like, this thing doesn't look permitted, but there's a lot of just janky work. Like, we were talking about last time, like the contractor will just totally botch it, and it's just a bad design in the back, and they could have done so much more. So I think it becomes a really cool design problem for contractors and architects and designers to try to like work with this. It's 1,200 square feet, you're not always going to get the 1,200 square feet. If it's either, I think it's like 50% or 1,200 square feet. But it's like, sometimes I'm walking in these places, it's like, and they just there's like some huge like water heater in the living room, and then there's like, it's just, sometimes there's really bad ones, but then there's really awesome ones. Sometimes the ADU in some cases is cooler than the main house. Yeah,
because a lot of times it's newer, and
so. And it's like a little better design or whatever. You can have a little modern thing. So we'll see how this ADU thing goes. The percentage of permits that they're processing for ADUs is like up like a lot, but it's still not, if you see the number per year, it's still not as many as you would think. But my kind of hypothesis on this whole thing is that they're going to do away with single family zoned places altogether. And they kind of tried that, I think it was last year, with the trying to remove a lot of the barriers near transit, where you could build, basically like develop a huge high rise and these crazy things. And it was fought with a lot of resistance, and it didn't pass. I don't know. I haven't done too much research into the politics of that, but it was
Yeah.
super political, and
Hmm.
it didn't happen. But I think that eventually, just the need for affordable housing and the growth of these cities and the urbanization, it's so exciting because San Diego was just a beer piss Navy town, backwater, no culture. It was, I mean, like, let's be honest, like it's not LA, it's not San Francisco,
Yeah.
but now it's really starting to urbanize,
Yeah.
and like
Hmm.
places like Little Italy are super hip and
Hmm.
cool. I think you're saying that's where you live, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So Little Italy, we got Hillcrest, North Park going off, and it's
Yeah.
really exciting as these places get more urban and kind of transform. And with the COVID-19 thing, a lot of people stopped driving, and there was like people were like, "Whoa, this is weird and really cool."
Hmm.
In some ways, I mean, in some ways, super not cool, but
Hmm.
yeah, it's like I think that people will start to transition away from the automobile as well. I don't think we're going to fully transition away from it yet, but I think that people are wanting to live and work and it all in one space where you don't have to drive out to Mission Valley and be in some business park.
Yeah.
You could
Yeah.
be in a city with public parks and
Yeah.
get your coffee and stuff. It's really cool. So
Hmm.
we'll see where that
Well,
thing goes, and then maybe skateboarding could be a huge part of developing that.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's true. I mean, this whole thing with COVID has put a diminished reliance on having to travel to your office, and it's sort of like forced that conversation forward as fast as it could. That you can still be at home and you can get your work done. And like what we're doing right now, Zoom is obviously like just like gone off the radar in terms of like how it's been adapted and used and replaced having to go to sit in the meeting. You don't have to do that, and you can still get the same conversations across. You can still get the same collaboration. So it's really pushed that you can work comfortably from home and you can still be as much a part of the office as you need to be. And so then that eliminates that whole commute that just is really unnecessary for most people.
Killing the environment.
Yeah, I know. I mean, when we look at like those pictures of LA in like the late 90s when it was just like no one gave a shit and it was just like smog cloud, and it's like, they've come a long way, but it's like
we've come a long way. I mean, like we're still not there, and but yeah, we have to acknowledge we've come a long way because during the Industrial Revolution,
yeah,
it was way worse.
Yeah,
and then in China or India, as in India, it's a lot worse. So we have to commend ourselves for how far we've come.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're still not there, but we've come a long way.
Yeah, yeah, and just being self-aware that there are improvements to be made, but yeah, I think it's pretty amazing. So.
Yeah, it's and then with the Zoom thing, when I first started seeing these, it was like it was tragic. It would be like a soldier away in like the Middle East and he's Zooming his daughter. And it's like, I saw that a couple times and it's like, oh, that's sad. You're not really there. Now I don't even notice. Like at first it was kind of weird and funny doing Zoom. I'm like used to this now.
Yeah.
And then with the iPhone, so it's like, I could do this all day. I'm not even missing the office.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I mean, there are some things you're never going to have the full human interaction of in person. There's obviously some things that you need to do. And then, the productivity, you could be doing other stuff when you're supposed to be doing, that's kind of how this whole thing developed with the manager and the hierarchical thing. You kind of have to be on people to get the full amount out of them. But if you can get the job done at your own home, I don't mind if somebody does it at their house.
Yeah. It's funny. It's like there's certain personality types, and you can sort of know the type of person who will be able to work from home and actually be able to work from home better. And then there's the people that that just get like distracted by the butterfly and like so it's like it's not for everyone. But when you can sort of like develop skills in people and find projects that like interest them, they kind of like lead themselves towards like doing a project they like. It's just funny, the different personality types and how it's worked for them.
Totally. And like it's not going to work for everybody, but some people like with shopping, Amazon, it's the same thing. It's like, brick and mortar is dead. Like who wants to pay for that? If you can who wants to pay for the rent of a brick and mortar when you can just sell on Amazon all day? Or like,
for sure.
Who wants to pay for the real estate office rent? Like what's the point at this point? What is the point? So it's really the world's changing really quick. It's a really exciting time. And I would have never thought about talking about urbanism and skateboarding in a serious conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
No, that would be like you would be laughed out of the room.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, even.
Yeah, it's like there's no way you're gonna like. I'm talking about doing kind of the San Diego Parks and Rec department. Maybe it's a skate park and rec department, and like that sound. It doesn't even sound crazy, but a couple of years ago, that's like you're a joke, dude. That can't even happen. Now it's like they're looking for things like this to try to.
And you got to start the conversation and present the information that helps support why it makes sense, and it's it becomes a serious topic, and they're like, it does make sense. So you just got to open people's eyes to certain things. So it's interesting.
Yeah, like you and me could talk about finding skate spots all day and skating and all this stuff, and then but it's serious now, and it's just funny how that changes overnight.
Yeah, for sure. Well, awesome, Shane. It's been super fun chatting with you, man. I'm sure we could go on for like another hour, but exactly. We'll wrap it up. I mean, is there any kind of last thoughts you kind of want to share or anything?
I just think that the final thought. Well, thank you for having me on, Pat.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. I guess the final thought is this: even though skateboarding is like growing every day, and more and more people are doing it, it's still the majority of countries in the world still don't have skateboarding, and I don't know if that's because they don't have the time for the leisure activity, or like maybe you have to work all day, or maybe the risk of getting injured is too great. But what I would love to see this thing spread to other countries. So that's kind of where my focus is kind of headed towards, like whether it's like a nonprofit doing skate parks in countries that don't have it could be really cool and things like this. But it's really, we think like, wow, this thing's blowing up and it's crazy. At the same time, it's not blowing up. Like, there's some countries, no skateboarding. When I was in India, no, like probably out of the millions of people there, I think, only a handful were skaters.
Yeah, really. Wow. That's crazy, because it's the most populous country on earth, and it's to like that they don't just have that like sort of form of recreation or anything. So that's crazy. So
so the future's bright, and we really are the pioneers right now, so
absolutely, man. Awesome. Well, thank you again, buddy. It was really fun talking, and we'll catch up again soon. That's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. We really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, subscribe, and leave us a review or a comment. We'd love to hear what you think, who you'd like us to have on, or other topics we should discuss. On YouTube, you can follow Market Real Estate. That's MRKT Real Estate, or look up Real SD Podcast on all the other major platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, and Anchor FM. Thanks again. See you next time.